President Obama's reading list. You know, he puts out his cool books and cool songs.
Right.
And so, big fan of Mr. Robot. And so I think he and Sam, you know, collaborated.
I don't forgive, and I don't need anyone to understand. This isn't a movie line, not a speech. These were Julia Roberts' words, spoken straight to Hollywood, on live television. When the lights went out, when the mask fell, no longer that million-dollar smile. Just a woman who swallowed her anger for 30 years, and now chooses to speak. At 58, Julia doesn't need to be loved anymore. She wants to reclaim what was taken, by telling the truth. And she named the 5 men she hates the most, 5 men who smiled on the red carpet but stabbed her in the back without hesitation. Who embraced her in front of the cameras, then sold her out like cheap entertainment. 5 names, 5 betrayals, and today, Julia is no longer silent. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, you'll understand Julia. Subscribe now, because what's about to be revealed isn't in the movies, and isn't in the headlines. Only here. For the first time.
Wasn't really well versed in podcasts at that time, and I had certainly never heard one.
But to understand why these 5 names ignite such deep hatred in Julia, you have to know who she is, and what she had to sacrifice to become the Julia Roberts the world once idolized. Born in 1967 in Georgia, Julia Roberts didn't come from a showbiz family, had no Hollywood relatives, no Broadway stage behind her, no influential directors to lift her up. She grew up in a broken home, with a single mother living below the poverty line and a childhood full of tears. While other kids dreamed of being princesses, Julia only dreamed of having enough money to survive. But it was that fierce will to live, and that radiant, backlit smile, that brought her to the big screen. Pretty Woman wasn't just a movie, it was a beauty manifesto for a new era of women, imperfect, unpolished, yet so real the world couldn't look away. Then came Notting Hill, Erin Brockovich, My Best Friend's Wedding. Julia didn't just act, she created cultural moments. She wasn't just a beauty, she was a living icon. She won an Oscar, was crowned box office queen, and forced Hollywood to reshape its beauty standards in her image. But the glory was only the surface. Behind the scenes were countless invisible wounds no one saw, roles stolen, manipulation, betrayal by those she once trusted. And now, when the spotlight fades, when her heart is no longer naive enough to forgive, Julia Roberts rises, stares into the camera, and names them, one by one. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted most? If yes, leave a comment. I understand, Julia. If it had to begin with one man, one first cut that changed Julia forever, it was the man who once waited for her at the altar, but lacked the integrity to hold her hand once the lights went out. The first one. The first nightmare. His name was Kiefer Sutherland. Kiefer Sutherland, the first name Julia Roberts spoke, not because he was the most famous, but because he was the first to make her stop believing in real-life romantic love. They were once engaged. Once appeared as Hollywood's golden couple. And then, Julia disappeared just 3 days before the wedding. She gave no statement to the press, no official word, no explanation to friends. She simply walked out of their apartment, checked into a hotel in Los Angeles, and never looked back. It was called the runaway bride of the century, but no one knew the truth. Julia had seen her fiancé, Kiefer, in the arms of her best friend at an exclusive film industry party. A glass of wine. A stroke of her hair. A smile with nothing to hide. And Julia stood behind the door, silently watching it all. She didn't scream. She didn't break anything. She just walked away. For the next 3 days, she cut off all contact. And on the morning of the wedding, while guests sat waiting and paparazzi crowded the church, Julia officially cancelled. The only message she sent Kiefer had just 3 words: I saw it. She didn't explain further. But they both knew, it was enough. Kiefer stayed silent. And all of Hollywood erupted. Some criticized Julia as childish, unprofessional, too emotional. But no one asked what she had endured during that entire relationship. Kiefer once trashed a backstage area after a premiere when the press called him Mr. Julia Roberts. He once yelled at her in a dressing room simply because she gave an interview without mentioning him. Julia stayed silent. Until now. At 58, she says, I didn't walk away from a wedding. I walked away from a life that would have kept me silent forever. To Julia, Kiefer wasn't just a broken first love. He was the reason she avoided marriage for nearly a decade. The nightmare that taught her, in Hollywood, even the man holding your hand before millions, could be hiding a knife behind your back. But kiefer was just the beginning. Because sometimes, the deepest pain doesn't come from those who leave us, but from the ones who stay, carrying a slow-burning wound that lasts a lifetime. Danny Moder, the only man Julia ever married, but also the man who made her live under the label of the other woman from the very first day of their marriage. They met on the set of The Mexican, when Danny was still married to Vera, his pregnant wife. Julia got swept into a love that came at the wrong time, but the feeling of finally being heard made her throw caution to the wind. The media called her the homewrecker with an angel's face. Danny divorced quickly. Julia stayed silent. They married in a quiet ceremony in New Mexico, no celebrities, no press. It seemed like a final destination. But Julia never felt safe. Because when something begins in betrayal, how can you ever trust it won't happen again? In the early years, she lost sleep, checked Danny's phone at midnight, haunted by the question, if he left her for me, what if someone else comes along and makes him leave me? Danny wasn't cruel. But he never made Julia feel enough. She once said, "Some nights I lay next to my husband and feel like someone who doesn't deserve happiness." Julia didn't hate Danny because he hurt her, she hated that being with him meant betraying herself. She hated how he let her take all the public blame, hated that he never once defended her in the press, hated the loneliness that crept into a marriage that looked peaceful on the outside. Danny was the only one who stayed, but also the one who made Julia stop believing that love means forgiveness. She said, "I used to think he was the only one who truly saw me. But no, he just saw a vulnerable woman, and chose to love that." And if you've ever entered a relationship to forget someone else, only to realize you were the one being used to replace someone too, maybe you understand Julia better than anyone. Leave a comment, "I once lost myself for someone I loved," because maybe, somewhere behind the stage lights, is your story too. Sometimes the deepest cuts don't come from lovers or ex-husbands, but from the very person who once lifted you to the top. Steven Soderbergh, the director behind the massive success of Erin Brockovich, the man who helped Julia win an Oscar, once called her the heart of the entire project. But he was also the first to turn her into a shadow in the very world she helped create. After Ocean's 11, Julia believed she'd continue to be a central figure in the sequel. But the script meetings excluded her. Internal emails no longer had her name on the lead list. And when she asked, Steven simply said, "This time, the audience wants the gentleman to shine." Ocean's 12 reduced her to a supporting role. By the third installment, she was gone entirely. No warning. No explanation. Julia stayed silent, but years later, in a rare interview, she said, "Some people give you a throne just so they have the power to pull it out from under you." What hurt Julia wasn't losing the role, it was being erased, as if she had never existed. She had fought for female characters, rewritten dialogue, poured her soul into the film. And the reward was being cut from the sequel. To Julia, Soderbergh wasn't just a director. He became a symbol of a Hollywood that uses you, and then discards you. She said, "They don't need to insult you. They just delete your name from the script cover, and you cease to exist." If you've ever believed you were irreplaceable, only to be discarded like an extra role, then you understand Julia. And if you want to uncover more untold truths behind Hollywood's brightest faces, subscribe now. What's coming next is more brutal than silence. After the men who shattered her heart, there was still one kind of man Julia hated even more, not because he loved her, but because he used her. Not betrayal born of emotion, but manipulation driven by fame. And that man was one of Hollywood's most charming stars, who entered her life under stage lights and through deliberately leaked photos, Bradley Cooper. He wasn't an ex, nor an open traitor. Bradley was the type Julia despised, sharp in a suit, calm in his smile, but hiding a calculated plan. They met in 2010, when Julia was producing The Art of Falling. She had full casting authority, and when Bradley walked in with sparkling eyes, Julia believed she had found both talent, and maybe a partner. She gave him the lead role, bypassing 3 veteran actors. But just weeks later, dating rumors exploded. Julia stayed silent, hoping audiences would focus on the film. But Bradley had other plans, releasing behind-the-scenes photos, leaking stories like, "We're getting to know each other." Julia was stunned to see herself on magazine covers, not as a producer, but as Bradley Cooper's new flame. And it didn't stop. While Julia was busy with post-production, Bradley secretly met with the director, suggesting changes to the ending so he'd emerge as the hero, while Julia's character was reduced to the sympathetic lover. When she protested, he replied with a smirk, "I just want a better movie." The breaking point came when a private voice recording, just a casual conversation between Julia and Bradley, was leaked online. Julia did not forgive. She removed Bradley from the sequel. "No thank you. No explanation. Just a cold, hard look." She said, "Hollywood teaches you how to act, but not how to survive a coworker's knife in your back." To Julia, Bradley didn't break her heart, he used her sincerity to polish his own image. If you've ever trusted someone, only to realize they used you to move ahead, you understand why Julia stayed silent, until the day she dared to say his name. The last one didn't stab her from the front, he suffocated her voice from behind. Not a lover. Not a co-star. But a director. A genius who once brought her to the pinnacle of acting, but also the man who shattered the part of her soul she believed would last forever. His name was Mike Nichols. Julia once called him a mentor. A wise man who listened. The one who helped her transform convincingly in the film Closer, a role expected to become the new symbol of the modern woman, complex, strong, free, and desperate to be understood. She placed her full trust in him, fought to protect the original script from being softened, and convinced the studio to give Nichols full creative freedom. But it was in that very freedom that betrayal began. When the final cut was released, Julia was stunned. The scenes where she confronted the male lead were cut. The lines that showed her strength and agency, gone. Her character, once independent and intelligent, became a faint shadow, fragile, hesitant, lost in a man's world. She was not invited to speak at press events. No one asked her about the role. And Nichols, the one who had promised to preserve the soul of the character, simply nodded, gave a faint smile, and stayed silent. Julia only said one thing, soft but like a blade, "I'm not angry that he cut the film. I'm angry that I no longer got to speak the way I wanted." From that moment on, she never mentioned him again. Never worked with him again. In a rare interview, when asked about Closer, Julia simply shook her head, "Some people don't kill you. But they strangle the best part of you, the part you believed would live forever." To Julia, Mike Nichols wasn't an enemy. He was a lesson, that even when you win the role, the spotlight, the applause, you can still lose, if your true voice has to be bent to fit into a man's mold. If you ever thought Julia was just the $1 million smile, then today, you've seen the truth. Behind that smile was blood, tears, and a silence that lasted for decades. The 5 names have been spoken, but what lingers isn't the scandal. It's the question, after everything, what does Julia still have left for herself? At 58, Julia Roberts no longer needs red carpets, empty praise, or glittering awards. She needs the truth. And today, she has spoken it. Not for revenge, but to finally live authentically, if only once. Hollywood once called her the last princess of American cinema. But behind that crown was a woman stabbed in the back by those she once called colleagues, lovers, soulmates. 5 names, not 5 scandals, but 5 scars that still burn in her memory to this day. Scars that made her retreat from film sets, that made her hesitant to speak about marriage, and that left her smile, bright as it is, forever carrying something the public will never truly touch. And if you ever thought Julia Roberts was just a $1 million smile, today, you've seen, behind that smile lies blood, tears, decades of silence, and 5 names she's never forgotten. If any of those names shocked you, leave a comment. And if you've ever been betrayed by the person you trusted most, share your story. Follow this channel, because the truths that are coming go even deeper, darker, and unlike anything you've heard before.